Hi, Assalamualaikum and hello everyone. How are you today? Hope everybody is fine. Today we're going to learn about chapter 8, which is transport system. In this chapter, we're going to learn about transport system in animals, emphasizing on human and transport in plants. There are three subtopics in this chapter, which are 8.1 mammalian heart and its regulation, 8.2 human lymphatic system, and 8.3 transport in plants. In this video, we are going to start with transport system in human. The learning outcomes for subtopic 8.1 are at the end of this topic. You should be able to explain initiation of heartbeat, cardiac cycle, ECG, and factors affecting heartbeat. The mammalian heart is located beneath the sternum of rib cage and consists mostly of cardiac muscle. It is a hollow, muscular organ that consists of four chambers: the left and right atrium or auricle at the upper part, and left and right ventricle at the lower part of the heart. The heart begins beating at 4 weeks after conception and does not stop until death. The heart is myogenic, meaning it contracts without any signal from the nervous system. The sequence of events which happens during each beat is determined by the pacemaker and conducting system of the heart. The sinoatrial node or SA node is the pacemaker that sets the tempo or rhythm of the heartbeat. Impulse transmission system or initiation of heartbeat consists of a few components, which are sinoatrial node or SA node, bundle of His, bundle branches, atrioventricular node or AV node, and Purkinje fibers. SA node generates electrical signals or impulses. The signals spread rapidly through both atria and then delayed at AV node for 0.1 second. The signals are then conducted towards the heart apex through bundle of His and the left and right bundle branches. When the signals spread throughout the ventricles through Purkinje fibers, both ventricles contract from the heart apex, moving upwards. The cardiac cycle refers to one complete sequence of heartbeat. One heartbeat consists of the relaxation phase or diastole and contraction phase or systole. The heart contracts and relaxes in a rhythmic cycle. The time taken for one cardiac cycle of contraction and relaxation is 0.8 seconds. The heart beats at a rate of 70 to 80 beats per minute. There are three stages of cardiac cycle. The first phase is atrial and ventricular diastole that takes 0.4 seconds. The second phase is atrial systole that takes 0.1 seconds. And the third phase is ventricular systole that takes 0.3 seconds. During the first phase, both atria and ventricles are relaxed. During the second phase, the atria contract but the ventricles are relaxed. During the third phase, the ventricles contract but the atria are relaxed. In next animation, it shows the single cardiac cycle and transportation of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood in and out of heart. Take note that when the heart contracts, the blood is pumped out from the chamber, and when it relaxes, blood flows into the chamber.
This animation illustrates a single cardiac cycle, starting with the right side of the heart. In reality, of course, the two sides of the heart work together at the same time, but it is easier to understand if we look at them separately, because each side of the heart has a different function. The cardiac cycle begins as deoxygenated blood flows from the body into the right atrium via the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. In the next phase of the cycle, the right atrium contracts, pumping blood into the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve. Once the right ventricle fills with blood, the tricuspid valve closes to prevent blood flowing back into the atrium. The right ventricle contracts, forcing the pulmonary valve to open as blood is pumped into the pulmonary artery. Blood then travels to the lungs and the pulmonary valve closes. At the same time, the right atrium relaxes, ready to accept the next intake of blood. In the lungs, the blood picks up oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. Oxygenated blood flows from the lungs into the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. The left atrium contracts to pump blood into the left ventricle through the mitral valve. Once the left ventricle has filled with blood, the mitral valve closes. Next, the left ventricle contracts, forcing the aortic valve to open, allowing blood to be pumped into the aorta and from there around the body. The aortic valve closes to prevent blood flowing back into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle relaxes, ready to accept the next intake of blood. Cardiac cycle is now complete.
The signals that travel to the heart during cardiac cycle produce electrical currents that can be recorded as electrocardiogram or ECG. ECG can be used to test or detect for signs of heart disease or heart problems. The next video explains about phases in ECG that correspond with the events in cardiac cycle.
Electrical activities of the heart can be recorded in the form of electrocardiogram, ECG, or EKG. An ECG is a composite recording of all the action potentials produced by the nodes and the cells of the myocardium. Each wave or segment of the ECG corresponds to a certain event of the cardiac electrical cycle. When the atria are full of blood, the SA node fires, electrical signals spread throughout the atria and cause them to depolarize. This is represented by the P wave on the ECG. Atrial contraction, or atrial systole, starts about 100 milliseconds after the P wave begins. The PQ segment represents the time the signals travel from the SA node to the AV node. The QRS complex marks the firing of the AV node and represents ventricular depolarization. Q wave corresponds to depolarization of the interventricular septum. R wave is produced by depolarization of the main mass of the ventricles. S wave represents the last phase of ventricular depolarization at the base of the heart. Atrial repolarization also occurs during this time, but the signal is obscured by the large QRS complex. The ST segment reflects the plateau in the myocardial action potential. This is when the ventricles contract and pump blood. The T wave represents ventricular repolarization immediately before ventricular relaxation, or ventricular diastole. The cycle repeats itself with every heartbeat.
There are two factors that can affect heartbeat, which are body temperature and blood pH. Heartbeat fluctuates with body temperature and pH in homeostatic regulation. When body temperature increases during fever, the heart will beat faster to increase the blood pressure due to the dilation of blood vessels. Blood vessels dilate to release heat. Blood pH is mainly affected by the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. When carbon dioxide is high in the blood, for example during vigorous exercise, blood pH will decrease. The drop in pH will stimulate the brain to increase the heartbeat in order to enhance delivery of oxygen-rich blood to body tissue and at the same time removing the carbon dioxide to the lungs. The learning outcomes for human lymphatic system are at the end of the lesson. You should be able to describe the pathway of lymph from tissue to blood circulatory system and describe the transport of lipids from small intestine into the bloodstream. Lymphatic system is the network of vessels that convey lymph from the tissue fluid to the bloodstream. Its functions are to transport excess interstitial fluid back to the blood, absorb fats and some vitamins from small intestine to the blood, and provide immunological defense against disease-causing agents. The next video shows how excess body tissue fluid is returned to the bloodstream in circulatory system.
In a nutshell, the lymphatic system is a drainage system that removes excess fluid from body tissues and returns it to the bloodstream. It's actually a subsystem of both the circulatory and immune system. The major purpose of the circulatory system is to bring oxygen and nutrients to body tissues and remove wastes. This exchange happens in the smallest blood vessels called the capillaries. Blood plasma containing nutrients moves out of capillaries at the arterial end of capillary beds, while tissue fluid containing wastes reabsorbs back in at the venous end. However, not all of the fluid is drawn back to the bloodstream at this point. About 15% of it is left in the tissues and would cause swelling if accumulated. This is where the lymphatic system comes into play. It picks up the excess fluid and returns it to the circulatory system. Unlike the blood circulatory system, which is a closed loop, the lymphatic system is a one-direction, open-ended network of vessels. Lymphatic vessels begin as lymphatic capillaries made of overlapping endothelial cells. The overlapping flaps function as a one-way valve. When fluid accumulates in the tissue, interstitial pressure increases, pushing the flaps inward, opening the gaps between cells, allowing fluid to flow in. As pressure inside the capillary increases, the endothelial cells are pressed outward, closing the gaps, thus preventing backflow. Unlike blood capillaries, the gaps in lymphatic capillaries are so large that they allow bacteria, immune cells such as macrophages, and other large particles to enter. This makes the lymphatic system a useful way for large particles to reach the bloodstream. It is used, for example, for dietary fat absorption in the intestine. Once inside lymphatic vessels, the recovered fluid is called lymph. Lymph flow is enabled by the same forces that facilitate blood flow in the veins. It goes from lymphatic capillaries to larger and larger lymphatic vessels and eventually drains into the bloodstream via the subclavian veins. On the way, it passes through a number of lymph nodes, which serve as filters, cleansing the fluid before it reaches the bloodstream. Lymph nodes are small bean-shaped structures scattered throughout the lymphatic network. They are most prominent in the areas where the vessels converge. Lymph nodes contain macrophages and dendritic cells that directly swallow up any pathogens, such as bacteria or viruses that may have been taken up from an infected tissue. They also contain lymphocytes, T cells and B cells, which are involved in adaptive immune response, a process that produces activated lymphocytes and antibodies specific to the invading pathogen. These are then carried by the lymph to the bloodstream to be distributed wherever they are needed.
Lipid is transported from the intestine into the bloodstream in the form of chylomicron in the lymph known as chyle in the lacteal. Lacteals are lymphatic capillaries in the villi of the small intestine. Chyle is then transported through lymphatic vessels into the lymphatic system and finally enter the left and right subclavian veins that return the lymph to the heart or into the blood circulatory system. Backflow is prevented by the lymphatic valves. This last video shows about the transportation of fats or lipids in the intestine into the lymphatic system.
The small intestine is lined with finger-like projections called villi that maximize the absorptive surface for nutrients from digested foods. Within each villus is a capillary network surrounding a specialized lymphatic vessel called a lacteal. While most nutrients, including glucose and amino acids, diffuse into the capillaries to enter the bloodstream, lipids pass instead through the lacteal to enter the lymphatic system. Fats that have been broken down into monoglycerides and fatty acids are absorbed into the enterocytes lining the villi. Here, they are reassembled into triglycerides, mixed with cholesterol, and encapsulated in a phospholipid and apolipoprotein outer shell. This new complex, called a chylomicron, acts to solubilize hydrophobic lipids within the body's aqueous environment. After exocytosis from the enterocyte, the chylomicron is too large to diffuse directly into surrounding capillaries. Rather, it passes through junctions in the endothelial surface of the lacteal to form a milky lymphatic fluid called chyle. Smooth muscles surrounding the lacteal contract, squeezing the chylomicron-filled chyle into larger lymphatic collecting vessels, which transport the lipids through the lymphatic system to eventually enter the bloodstream.
Finally, we have finished learning about mammalian heart and its regulation and the human lymphatic system. Next lecture, we are going to learn about transport in plants.